The candle in the center of the table had burned down to a puddle of wax, and Flynn Ortega was beginning to accept that the woman he had spent 4 months courting through carefully penned letters was not going to walk through the door of the Stag and Stone Inn tonight, or perhaps any night at all. He sat with his back straight despite the disappointment settling like cold stones in his chest, watching the hired fare crowd thin as men found their employers or their beds or both. His own supper had gone cold an hour ago, the roasted chicken congealing in its own grease, the bread hard at the edges. He had ordered 2 plates, paid for 2 meals, and reserved the best corner table in the common room because he wanted everything to be perfect when Margaret finally saw him in person, instead of through ink on parchment. They had begun writing last winter when his cousin had shown him her advertisement in the Millbrook Parish newsletter. A schoolteacher's daughter, educated, fond of poetry and gardening, seeking correspondence with a gentleman of steady employment and good character with the intention of marriage. Flynn had responded on a whim during a long, snow-locked week when his crew could not work, and her first letter back had been so clever and warm that he had written again, immediately. 4 months of letters, each one longer than the last, each one drawing him deeper into the fantasy of a woman who understood his jokes, who asked intelligent questions about masonry and bridge engineering, who signed her letters with great affection, and then with love and finally, yours, if you will have me. He had arranged to meet her here, in Greywater Village where his current project was located, on hiring fair night when the inn would be full and lively, and she could travel under the respectability of her uncle's merchant caravan. He had arrived at sunset, dressed in his best wool coat, his hair still damp from a bath, a small velvet box in his pocket containing a silver ring set with a chip of garnet. Now the candle was dead, and most of the crowd had dispersed, and Flynn was staring at the empty chair across from him, trying to decide whether to feel angry or simply sad. That is a terrible waste of good chicken. He looked up to find the Orc Barmaid standing beside his table with her own plate in one hand and a fresh pitcher of ale in the other. Her name was Greta Kane, and Flynn had been leaving her generous tips for the past 7 weeks because she was quick and funny, and never acted like his questions about local stone suppliers were stupid. She had green skin the color of summer moss, small tusks that barely protruded past her upper lip, and black hair she kept in a thick braid that hung past her shoulders. Her build was what his mother would have called a figure, all curves and softness wrapped in a practical cotton dress and a stained apron. "I am not very hungry anymore," Flynn admitted. "May I?" Greta gestured at the empty chair. He nodded, too tired to care about propriety, and she sat down with an efficient grace that made the chair creak. Up close, he could see the flush of exertion on her cheeks and the strand of hair that had escaped her braid to curl against her pointed ear. "Her loss is my luck tonight," Greta said, spearing a piece of his chicken with her own fork and popping it into her mouth. She chewed, swallowed, and grinned at him with those small tusks catching the lamplight. "Because this is excellent chicken, and I have been on my feet since dawn. Unless you are still hoping she will arrive. It is past the 9th bell. She is not coming," Flynn said flatly. "Then you should eat. Heartbreak is no excuse to waste food, and you paid for it." Greta pushed his plate toward him and poured ale into both their cups. "I saw you waiting. You looked so hopeful at sunset that I thought you might float right off that chair." "I was courting someone through letters," Flynn said, and then wondered why he was telling her. Perhaps because she had kind eyes despite her teasing, or perhaps because he had no one else to talk to in this village where he was only a temporary resident. "We were supposed to meet tonight. Love letters." Greta's eyes went soft. "That is romantic. What happened? I have no idea. She simply did not come. Did she send word? Nothing. Greta frowned and took a long drink of ale. That is cruel. You deserved at least an explanation. Perhaps something happened to her uncle's caravan. Perhaps she looked through the window, saw you, and decided you were not handsome enough. Greta said it lightly, but she was watching him with a shrewd intelligence that suggested she was testing something. Thank you for that comforting thought. I am not in the business of comforting. I am in the business of serving ale and occasionally eating abandoned chicken. She took another piece from his plate. But if it helps, you are quite handsome. Good bones in the face, nice shoulders, all your teeth. She was a fool. Despite himself, Flynn laughed. It came out rusty and surprised, but it was a laugh nonetheless. You are very direct. I am an orc working in a human village. Direct is the only way I survive. Greta leaned back in her chair and studied him with those dark, intelligent eyes. So what will you do now? Mope into your ale for the rest of the night. Write her an angry letter demanding explanation. I had not thought that far ahead. Well, while you are thinking, eat. You are a mason, yes. Building the new bridge. I am the master mason. How did you know? You have stone dust under your fingernails, and you have been buying drinks for the quarry workers every Friday night since you arrived. Also, you asked me about the lime supplier 3 weeks ago, and then spent an hour explaining the difference between hot lime and hydraulic lime, which was much more interesting than it had any right to be. Flynn felt something warm unfurl in his chest, something that had nothing to do with the ale. You remembered that. I remember most things. It makes me good at this job. Greta tilted her head, and the escaped strand of hair fell across her face. She blew it away impatiently. The bridge is beautiful, by the way. I walk past it every morning on my way to market. The arch is going to be magnificent when it is finished. You understand bridge architecture. I understand when something is well made. My father was a carpenter before he died. He taught me to see the bones of a thing. She paused, then added quietly, he also taught me that a person who builds something meant to last is worth knowing. There was a weight to those words that Flynn did not quite understand, but before he could respond, a drunk farmer stumbled against their table, and Greta was on her feet instantly, steering the man toward the door with a firm hand and a stream of cheerful instructions. Flynn watched her work, noticing for the first time how she moved through the crowd with confident efficiency, how she diffused a brewing argument between two carters with a joke and a free round, how she caught a falling tray without spilling a single cup. She returned to his table 10 minutes later, slightly more disheveled but grinning. Where were we? You were eating my chicken and telling me I have good bones. Ah yes, important topics. She sat down again, and this time she filled both their cups to the brim. To women who do not know a good thing when they have it, she said, raising her cup. Flynn hesitated, then raised his own. To unexpected dinner companions. They drank, and the ale was bitter and perfect, and Flynn realized that at some point in the last 20 minutes he had stopped thinking about Margaret entirely. They talked until the last customers stumbled out and the innkeeper began pointedly stacking chairs on tables. Greta told him about growing up in the Orc settlement 5 miles north, about her mother who had died when she was young and her 2 brothers who worked the quarry. Flynn told her about his apprenticeship in the capital, about the 7 bridges he had built across the kingdom, about the way he had never stayed in one place longer than a contract required. You are a wanderer, Greta said. It was not quite a question. I am a specialist. People hire me to solve problems and then I move on. Do you like that? The moving, Flynn considered. I like the work. The bridges are what matter. That is not an answer. It is the only answer I have. Greta studied him for a long moment, and Flynn had the uncomfortable feeling that she could see straight through him to all the restless, rootless parts he tried to ignore. Then she stood and began collecting their dishes. "I should go. Early start tomorrow." "Let me walk you home," Flynn said, standing as well. "It is late. I am an orc. No one troubles me." "Then let me walk you home anyway, to thank you for the company." Greta's expression softened, and Flynn saw something flicker across her face that might have been pleasure or might have been something more complicated. "All right," she said quietly. "That would be nice." They walked through the dark village streets with a sliver of moon overhead and the sound of the river constant in the background. Greta lived in a small cottage on the edge of town, tucked between the blacksmith's forge and a field that would be planted with oats come spring. Flynn walked slowly, reluctant for the evening to end, and when they reached her door she turned to face him with her back against the weathered wood. "Thank you," she said, "for letting me sit with you. I know you were expecting someone else. I am glad you did." Flynn meant it completely. "Will you write to her?" "The letter woman? I do not know. Should I?" Greta bit her lip, and Flynn found himself staring at the small tusks framing her mouth, wondering what it would be like to kiss her. The thought startled him with its clarity and its intensity. "That depends," Greta said carefully, "on whether you want answers or whether you want to move forward." "What would you do?" "I would move forward, but I am not you." She smiled, and it was the saddest smile Flynn had ever seen. "Good night, Flynn Ortega. Thank you for the walk." She slipped inside before he could respond, and Flynn stood on her doorstep for a long moment, listening to the river and thinking about the way she had said his name, like it was something precious she was afraid to break. He walked back to his own lodgings at the inn with his hands in his pockets, and the velvet box pressing against his thigh like an accusation. When he got to his room, he sat on the narrow bed and opened the box and looked at the garnet ring he had bought for a woman he had never met. And then he closed it again and put it in the bottom of his trunk under his spare shirts. He did not write to Margaret. Not that night, and not the next day, and not the day after that. Instead, he threw himself into the bridge work with renewed focus, overseeing the construction of the timber centering that would support the arch until the keystone was set, checking and rechecking the measurements for the voussoirs that would form the curved structure. The bridge was the important thing. The bridge was always the important thing. But every evening when he came back to the inn, dusty and tired, Greta would catch his eye from across the common room and smile, and Flynn would find himself taking a table instead of going straight to his room. She never sat with him again during the busy dinner hours, but after the crowd thinned, she would bring him a late supper and linger to talk, perching on the edge of a chair or leaning against the table with her hip cocked and her arms crossed. They talked about everything. She told him about the village politics, about old Gerard the blacksmith who was feuding with the miller over a boundary stone, about the widow Hanson who everyone suspected was courting the new priest. He told her about the technical challenges of building a bridge in a location with seasonal flooding, about the calculations required to determine the curve of the arch, about his apprentice days when he had mixed mortar until his hands bled. One night, nearly 2 weeks after the hiring fair, Flynn stayed until the inn closed and walked Greta home again. This time when they reached her door, she did not go inside immediately. "Can I ask you something?" she said. "Of course. Why did you want to meet her, the letter woman?" Flynn leaned against the doorframe, considering. "I suppose I thought it was time to settle down. I am 32. I have been on the road for 14 years. Everyone keeps telling me I should want a home and a wife and children. You want those things. I thought I did." When I was reading her letters, I could picture it all very clearly. A house somewhere, maybe a workshop, steady work, someone to come home to. But now I am not sure if I wanted those things or if I just wanted to want them. He looked at her in the moonlight, at the way the shadows played across her green skin and made her eyes look impossibly deep. "Does that make sense?" "Yes," Greta said softly. "It makes perfect sense." She hesitated, then added, "Do you still think about her?" "Not as much as I probably should." "What do you think about instead?" The question hung between them like a dare. Flynn knew what the honest answer was. Knew it with the same certainty he knew the tensile strength of granite or the setting time of lime mortar. But saying it out loud would change things in ways he was not sure he was ready for. "I think about this bridge," he said, which was both true and cowardly. "It is going to be the best thing I have ever built." Greta's expression flickered with something that might have been disappointment, but she covered it quickly with a smile. "Then I will keep watching it grow." "Good night, Flynn." "Good night, Greta." She went inside and Flynn walked back through the dark streets feeling like he had failed some kind of test, though he could not say exactly what kind or why it mattered so much. The bridge grew. The timber centering was completed, and the first layer of voussoirs was set, each stone cut to precise angles by the Orc quarry workers who brought them down the mountain road on heavy wagons. Flynn worked alongside his crew, checking every joint, every measurement, every line. The arch began to take shape, curving up from both sides of the river like hands reaching toward each other. And every night he went back to the inn and found Greta waiting with food and conversation, and that smile that made his chest feel too tight. 3 weeks after the hiring fair, Flynn arrived at the inn to find Greta arm wrestling a carter twice her size while a crowd of men cheered and placed bets. Money was piled on the table between them, and Greta's face was set in fierce concentration as she slowly, inexorably, forced the carter's hand down to the scarred wood. The crowd erupted when she won, and Greta stood and collected her earnings with a triumphant grin, stuffing coins into her apron pocket while the defeated carter shook his head in rueful admiration. "You are a menace," Flynn said when she brought him his supper 20 minutes later. "I am a woman making a living," Greta corrected. "The tips are good, but arm wrestling tips are better. Also, it is satisfying." "How often do you win?" "Always. I am very strong." She flexed an arm and Flynn could see the muscle shift under her skin, solid and real. "Want to try?" "Absolutely not. I need my hands for masonry." She laughed, and the sound was bright and unguarded. "Wise man, I would destroy you." "I do not doubt it." She sat down across from him without asking this time, and Flynn realized that somewhere along the way this had become their routine. Dinner alone, then dinner with Greta, then walking her home through streets that grew more familiar every night. He had been in Greywater for 2 months, and it was starting to feel less like a job site and more like something else, something he did not have a name for. "The arch looks good," Greta said, stealing a piece of bread from his plate. "How much longer until it is finished?" 9 weeks, maybe 10. "We need to complete the arch, set the keystone, build the parapets, and pave the roadbed. And then you leave." It was a statement, not a question, but Flynn heard the weight behind it. "That is usually how it works. The bridge is finished, I move to the next project." "Do you have a next project?" "Not yet, but something always comes up." Greta nodded slowly, and Flynn watched emotions flicker across her face too quickly to read. Then she stood abruptly, smoothing her apron. "I should get back to work. Enjoy your supper." She was gone before he could ask what he had said wrong, disappearing into the kitchen and not emerging again, even though Flynn waited until the innkeeper started his pointed chair stacking routine. He walked home alone that night, hands in his pockets, wondering why the thought of leaving Greywater had suddenly started to feel like losing something important. The next evening Greta was back to normal, cheerful and teasing, and Flynn told himself he had imagined the tension. But it happened again, a few days later, when someone asked about his plans after the bridge. And again the following week when a traveling merchant mentioned a bridge project in the north that needed an experienced mason. Each time Greta would withdraw, her smile becoming brittle and false, her conversations clipped. And each time Flynn would feel that uncomfortable twist in his chest and wonder what he was supposed to do about it. He was a bridge builder. He had always been a bridge builder. His whole life was designed around moving from project to project, going where he was needed, never putting down roots. That was the deal he had made with himself when he left the capital at 18 with his newly minted mason's marks and a letter of introduction from his master. He built things that lasted, and then he moved on. Clean, simple, safe. Except nothing felt clean or simple or safe anymore, not when Greta looked at him with those dark eyes that seemed to see straight through to all his careful defenses. 6 weeks after the hiring fair, Flynn was working late at the bridge site, supervising the placement of a particularly tricky voussoir, when one of the quarry workers called down from the road. "Mason Ortega, someone here to see you." Flynn climbed up from the riverbank, wiping sweat from his face, and stopped dead when he saw who was waiting. Margaret stood beside a hired carriage, wearing a traveling dress of deep blue and a matching bonnet, looking exactly like her description in her letters. Blonde hair, pale skin, a neat figure, a serious expression. She was pretty in a careful, composed way, and she was wringing her hands nervously. "Master Ortega," she said, "I am Margaret Whitmore. I apologize for not sending word ahead, but I had to come. I owe you an explanation for my behavior at the hiring fair." Flynn was aware of his crew watching with unconcealed interest, of the quarry workers pausing in their loading, of the way his heart was beating too fast for reasons he could not quite identify. "Perhaps we should speak somewhere more private," he said. They walked to a small clearing away from the bridge, out of earshot of the curious workers. Margaret twisted her hands together and would not quite meet his eyes. "I am so very sorry," she began. "I know my absence must have seemed cruel and inexplicable. The truth is that I did come to Greywater that night. My uncle's caravan arrived just before sunset, and I went to the inn intending to meet you. But you did not come inside." "No." "Because I saw you through the window, sitting at that table looking so hopeful, and I panicked." She finally looked at him, and her eyes were wet. "I have been corresponding with another gentleman as well, someone from my own town, someone my father approves of. He proposed to me the week before the hiring fair, and I accepted." Flynn felt oddly detached, like he was watching this conversation happen to someone else. "Then why were you coming to meet me?" "Because I was not sure. Because your letters were so wonderful, and I thought perhaps you would be better. But when I saw you there, waiting for me, I realized how unfair I had been. To you, to him, to everyone. So I left without even giving you the courtesy of an explanation." She took a shaky breath. "We were married 2 weeks ago, but I could not stop thinking about how badly I treated you, so I convinced my husband to let me travel here to apologize in person." "You came all this way to apologize. You deserved that much, more than that, truthfully." She smiled sadly. "For what it is worth, I think you dodged a rather weak-willed woman. Anyone who could be so uncertain between two good men is probably not worth having." Flynn surprised himself by laughing. "That is remarkably honest. I am trying to be better, more decisive. My husband is helping with that." She pulled a letter from her pocket. "I wrote everything down as well in case I lost my nerve, but I wanted to tell you in person that I am sorry and that I hope you find someone who deserves you." "I appreciate that," Flynn said, and meant it. The strange thing was that he felt nothing but a mild curiosity and a distant sense of relief. This woman had occupied his thoughts for months, had represented everything he thought he wanted. And now she was standing in front of him, and all he could think about was whether Greta would be working tonight. They talked for a few more minutes, polite and distant, and then Margaret returned to her carriage and drove away. Flynn stood in the clearing for a long time after she left, turning the letter over in his hands without opening it. One of the quarry workers, a massive orc named Draken who was Greta's older brother, came to find him as the sun was setting. That was her, yes. The letter woman, yes. And she is married to someone else and came to apologize for standing me up. Draken grunted. Humans. Always making everything complicated. He studied Flynn with the same shrewd intelligence his sister had. You going to mope about it? I do not think so. I find I do not care as much as I expected to. Good. Because we have 3 more voussoirs to set before dark and I want to get home for supper. Draken started back toward the bridge, then paused. My sister likes you, in case you are as stupid as most humans and have not noticed. Flynn stared at him. She told you that. She does not have to. I have eyes. Draken's expression turned serious. She is good at hiding it, but she cares, more than she should for a man who is leaving in 9 weeks. I do not want to hurt her. Then do not. Either stay or leave her alone. But do not string her along because you are lonely or bored or flattered. The big orc's voice had gone hard. She is my sister. I will not watch someone break her heart. He walked away before Flynn could respond, leaving Flynn standing alone with Margaret's unopened letter and the uncomfortable weight of truths he had been trying to avoid. That night, Flynn went to the inn with his heart pounding and his thoughts in chaos. Greta was there, laughing with a table of farmers, her braids swinging as she moved. When she saw him, her smile faltered for just a moment, and Flynn knew that somehow she had already heard about Margaret's visit. Villages were like that. News traveled faster than reason. He took his usual table and waited. Greta brought him food but did not sit down, and when he tried to catch her eye, she was always looking somewhere else. Finally, after the dinner crowd had thinned, Flynn stood and walked directly to the kitchen door where she was collecting dirty dishes. I need to talk to you, he said. I am working. Greta, please. She set the dishes down with more force than necessary and followed him outside to the small courtyard behind the inn where they kept the beer barrels and the firewood. The night air was cool and sharp, and Greta wrapped her arms around herself. I heard she came, Greta said before Flynn could speak. The letter woman. My brother told me. She is married. She came to apologize for not meeting me at the hiring fair. Oh. Greta's expression was carefully neutral. How do you feel about that? Relieved, mostly. Relieved. Because it means I do not have to feel guilty about what I am going to say next. Flynn took a breath, steadying himself. I have been thinking about you constantly for weeks. I wait all day to see you in the evenings. I walk you home because I do not want our conversations to end. When I am working on the bridge, half my thoughts are about showing you what we have accomplished. And when Margaret stood in front of me today, all I could think was that she was not you. Greta had gone very still, her eyes wide and her lips slightly parted. I know I am leaving in 9 weeks, Flynn continued. I know this is probably a terrible idea. I know that I have spent my entire adult life avoiding exactly this kind of complication. But I also know that I would regret it for the rest of my life if I did not at least tell you how I feel. For a long moment, Greta said nothing, and Flynn felt panic rising in his chest. Then she laughed, a shaky sound that was half sob, and covered her face with her hands. You impossible man, she said through her fingers. Do you have any idea how humiliating this has been? Falling for someone who was obviously in love with someone else, watching you wait for her every night. I told myself I was being ridiculous, that you were just being friendly, that I needed to protect my heart and stop being stupid. She dropped her hands and Flynn saw that her eyes were wet. "And now you stand here and say these things, and I am supposed to what? Pretend that I have not been falling for you since the night you let me eat your chicken and did not treat me like I was less than human. Pretend that I do not know you are leaving in 9 weeks and that this is going to destroy me." "I do not want to destroy you," Flynn said quietly. "Then what do you want?" "I want to be with you. For however long I can. I know it is selfish and I know it ends badly, but I cannot pretend any more that I do not want this." Greta stepped closer, and Flynn could smell the scent of her, yeast and herbs and something warm and indefinably her. "What if I cannot do that? What if I cannot be with you knowing you are going to leave? Then I will walk away right now and we will pretend this conversation never happened. Could you do that? Walk away? If it is what you need, yes." She studied his face for a long moment, and Flynn held himself still under that searching gaze, letting her see everything he felt. Then Greta reached up and cupped his face in her hands, her palms rough and warm against his skin. "I am going to regret this," she whispered. "But I cannot walk away either." She kissed him, and Flynn felt something slot into place in his chest that he had not known was missing. Her lips were soft despite the small tusks, her hands gentle on his face, and when she made a small sound in the back of her throat, Flynn wrapped his arms around her waist and pulled her closer. They broke apart breathing hard, and Greta rested her forehead against his chest. 9 weeks, she said. 9 weeks, Flynn agreed. Then we make them count. They did. Flynn had never been good at halfway measures, and he threw himself into courting Greta with the same focused intensity he brought to his bridge work. He brought her wildflowers from the riverbank and helped her carry water when the inn's well ran low. He fixed the loose hinge on her front door and replaced the cracked shutter on her bedroom window. He learned that she liked honey in her tea and hated turnips, and could recite bawdy ballads from memory that made him laugh until his sides hurt. And every night he walked her home, and they would stand on her doorstep kissing like teenagers until one of them had to pull away or risk scandal. The bridge grew. The arch climbed higher from both banks, the gap between them narrowing with each stone set. Flynn worked with his crew during the day and spent his evenings with Greta, and for the first time in his adult life the work was not enough. He wanted the sun to set faster. He wanted the days to be shorter. He wanted more time with the orc woman who had somehow become the center of his world. 4 weeks until the bridge was finished. 3 weeks. 2. Flynn did not talk about what came next, and neither did Greta, and they existed in a strange, fragile present tense where the future was something they could ignore if they just did not look at it directly. Then, with 11 days left on the project, everything changed. Flynn was at the bridge site when a rider came through the village at full gallop, shouting about the spring melt starting early in the mountains. Within an hour, the river began to rise, the water climbing the banks faster than anyone had predicted. Flynn stood on the half-finished bridge and watched the current strengthen, watched debris begin to flow past, and felt cold fear settle in his stomach. The timber centering that supported the arch was anchored to the riverbed with heavy pilings, but it was designed for normal water levels, not a flood. If the river rose high enough, the increased current could lift the centering and collapse the entire arch before they could set the keystone. "We need to reinforce it," Flynn told his foreman, a grizzled man named Peter who had been building bridges longer than Flynn had been alive. "Double the anchor lines, add bracing on the upstream side. In this current, you will lose men. Then we work from the banks. Rig lines from both sides, weight them with stone." They worked through the night, the entire crew plus every able-bodied man in the village who knew how to tie a knot or swing a hammer. The river kept rising, swallowing the banks, reaching for the timber framework. Flynn waded into the water up to his waist, shouting instructions, helping to secure lines. Watching the structure he had spent months building strain against forces it was never meant to withstand. Dawn came gray and cold, and the river was still rising. The centering was holding but barely, and Flynn could see the timbers beginning to shift, the joints starting to work loose. They needed more weight, more anchoring, more everything, and they were running out of time. He stumbled back to the inn at mid-morning, soaked and exhausted, planning to grab food and fresh rope and get back to the bridge. Instead, he found Greta waiting in the courtyard with her brother Draken and a dozen other orcs from the quarry, all of them dressed for hard work. "We are here to help," Greta said simply. "It is dangerous. The current is stronger than it looks. We are quarry workers. We know how to move stone and timber in difficult conditions." Draken stepped forward, his massive frame making even Flynn feel small. "My sister says your bridge is in trouble. We are here to make sure that does not happen." Flynn looked at Greta and saw determination in her eyes and pride, and something fierce and bright that made his chest ache. "Thank you," he said. "Thank us when it is over. Now tell us what you need." The orc crew made the difference. They were stronger than human workers, more sure-footed in the treacherous current, and they worked with the synchronized efficiency of people who had spent years cutting stone together. Draken organized teams to ferry massive rocks from the quarry, building underwater cairns to anchor the centering from the downstream side. Greta herself waded into the river with ropes tied around her waist, working alongside the men to secure bracing timbers while Flynn shouted directions from the bank. They worked all day and into the next night, taking shifts when exhaustion made the work too dangerous, rotating fresh workers in while others collapsed on the bank to sleep for a few hours. The river kept rising, kept pulling at the timbers, kept trying to destroy months of work in a single catastrophic moment. And then, just before dawn on the second day, the rain stopped. The river crested and held and slowly, painfully slowly began to recede. The centering remained standing, battered but intact, and when the sun finally broke through the clouds, Flynn stood on the bank and felt something crack open in his chest. Greta found him there an hour later, both of them filthy and exhausted and swaying on their feet. "It held," she said. "Because of you, all of you." Flynn turned to face her, and the words came spilling out before he could think better of them. "I do not want to leave." Greta went very still. "What?" "I do not want to leave Greywater. I do not want to leave you. I have been trying to figure out how to say this for weeks, and now I am just saying it badly because I am too tired to be clever. But Greta, I love you. I think I have loved you since you sat down at my table and ate my chicken and made me laugh when I thought I would never laugh again. Flynn, I know I have no plan. I know I have spent my entire life moving from place to place. I know this makes no practical sense. But watching you in that river, watching you risk yourself to save my bridge, I realized that nothing I have ever built matters as much as what I could build here with you. If you will have me." Greta stared at him for a long moment, and Flynn watched emotions chase across her face too quickly to name. Then she started crying, tears streaming down her dirty face, and Flynn felt his heart drop. "I am sorry," he started to say, but she cut him off by grabbing his shirt and pulling him into a kiss that tasted like river water and desperation. "You cannot just say things like that," she said against his mouth, half laughing, half sobbing. "You cannot just decide to stay because of one dramatic moment. What about your work, your career? You are a master mason, Flynn. You build bridges across the kingdom. How can you give that up?" "I am not giving it up. I am choosing where to do it. There are rivers everywhere that need bridges. I could stay here and take local commissions, or I could apply for a district position. Those barely exist. They almost never come open. I know, but I am going to try anyway. Flynn wiped tears from her face with his thumbs, his hands shaking. Because the alternative is leaving you, and I cannot do that. I will not do that. Greta searched his face, and Flynn let her see everything, let her see how scared he was and how certain and how desperately he meant every word. "What if you regret it?" she whispered. "What if you stay and then resent me for tying you down? I could never resent you. You are the best thing that has ever happened to me. You barely know me. It has been 2 months. I know you are brave and funny and kind. I know you are the smartest person in any room even when people underestimate you because of your skin. I know you make me want to be better, to build things that matter, to put down roots for the first time in my life. What else do I need to know?" Greta let out a shaky breath and rested her forehead against his. "This is insane, probably. We are going to have to deal with so much prejudice. People who think humans and orcs should not be together. I know. My brothers are going to interrogate you, extensively." "I look forward to it," she laughed, the sound watery but genuine. "You are serious. You are actually serious about this, completely." "Then yes. Yes, I will have you, you ridiculous man. I will have you and love you and probably drive you insane, but yes." Flynn kissed her again, deep and thorough, not caring that they were both filthy and exhausted and standing in front of half the village. When they broke apart, Greta was smiling through her tears, and Flynn thought he had never seen anything more beautiful. The bridge was finished 3 weeks later, right on schedule despite the flood. The last stone was set, the centering removed, and the arch stood free for the first time, a graceful curve of honey-colored limestone spanning the river like something that had always been meant to be there. But before the final work could be completed, Flynn received a letter that made his hands shake when he opened it. The Kingdom Bridge Warden's office had reviewed his application and work history. They were offering him the position of District Bridge Warden for the Upper Valley region, a territory that included Greywater and the surrounding villages. It was a permanent post, one that would allow him to oversee maintenance on existing bridges and approve designs for new ones while staying in one place. The job almost never came open, and Flynn suspected that someone had pulled strings somewhere, though he could not imagine who. He showed the letter to Greta that evening at the inn, and she read it twice before looking up at him with wide eyes. "This is perfect. This is everything you wanted." "This is everything we wanted," Flynn corrected. "I never would have applied if not for you. When do you start?" 2 weeks. After the bridge dedication ceremony. He took her hand across the table. "Which brings me to something else I want to ask you. Flynn, come with me to the Keystone setting tomorrow. I want to show you something." The ceremony was scheduled for noon the next day, with half the village turning out to watch. The priest blessed the bridge, the mayor gave a speech, and then Flynn climbed onto the parapet to speak to the crowd. "This bridge was a community effort," he said, projecting his voice to carry. "It would not be standing without the quarry workers who cut the stone, the carters who hauled it, the men who worked through a flood to save the centering. But most of all, it would not be standing without the courage of a group of orc workers who risked their lives when the river rose." He gestured to where Draken and his crew stood at the back of the crowd, looking uncomfortable with the attention. "As is tradition, the names of key builders are cut into the bridge as a permanent record. I want to invite Greta Kane to join me on the parapet to see her name among them." The crowd murmured, and Flynn saw Greta go pale. She climbed onto the bridge with shaking hands, and Flynn led her to the upstream parapet where he had spent the previous evening with a chisel and mallet. There, cut into the honey-colored limestone alongside his own mark and those of his crew, was her name in elegant letters: Greta Kane, Builder. "You built this too," Flynn said quietly for her ears only. "You saved it. Your name belongs here." Greta traced the letters with trembling fingers, tears streaming down her face. Then Flynn took her other hand and went down on one knee, and the crowd went silent. "I have built 7 bridges," Flynn said, his voice carrying in the sudden quiet. "I have built them for lords and merchants in towns. I have built them across rivers and gorges and roads, but this is the first bridge I have built for love." He pulled the velvet box from his pocket, the one he had bought for Margaret and never given, the one he had been carrying like a talisman for months. Inside, the garnet ring caught the sunlight. "Greta Kane, you are the foundation I want to build my life on. You are the keystone that makes everything else stand. Will you marry me?" Greta was crying too hard to speak, but she nodded frantically, and Flynn slipped the ring onto her finger and stood and kissed her while the crowd erupted in cheers. Not everyone cheered. Flynn saw a few sour faces in the crowd, a few people who turned away muttering. But most of the village was applauding, and Draken was grinning fit to split his face, and the mayor was thumping Flynn on the back hard enough to bruise. "Yes," Greta finally managed to say, clinging to Flynn like he might disappear. "Yes, yes, 1,000 times yes." They were married 6 weeks later in a small ceremony beside the river, with the bridge standing witness overhead. Greta wore a dress the color of cream that her friends from the village had helped her sew. And Flynn wore his best suit and could not stop smiling. The priest performed the ceremony with only the slightest hesitation over the interspecies aspect, and Draken and his crew served as witnesses along with Flynn's foreman Peter. The reception was held at the inn, and Greta's friends had cooked enough food to feed twice the number of guests. There was music and dancing and more ale than was strictly wise, and Flynn danced with his new wife until his feet ached and his face hurt from smiling. Late in the evening, when the party was winding down, Greta pulled him outside to the courtyard where they had first kissed. "Are you happy?" she asked, deliriously. "Are you? I keep thinking I am going to wake up and find out this was all a dream, the wonderful man who showed up and decided to stay, the job that lets him keep doing what he loves, the bridge with my name on it." She touched the ring on her finger. "It is too perfect." "Not perfect, but very good." Flynn pulled her close, resting his chin on top of her head. "We are going to have to work for this. There will be people who do not approve. There will be hard days. I know, but we will have each other, always." They stood there in the darkness, holding each other and listening to the river, and Flynn thought about all the bridges he had built, all the places he had been, all the roads he had traveled. And he thought about how none of it had meant anything until he found the place he was supposed to stay. Flynn and Greta moved into a small house on the edge of Greywater, close enough to the bridge that Flynn could walk to work and close enough to the inn that Greta could continue her job until they were more established. Flynn threw himself into his new position as district bridge warden, inspecting the aging bridges throughout the upper valley and making recommendations for repairs and replacements. The work was different from building, but no less satisfying. He traveled the district regularly, usually taking 2 or 3 day trips to remote villages, and Greta would pack him supplies and kiss him goodbye and be waiting when he returned with stories about the inn and the village and whatever small dramas had unfolded in his absence. Their first winter together was hard. The house had drafts they had not noticed in the autumn, and heating it was expensive. Money was tight on Flynn's salary alone, though it would improve as he took on consulting work. They argued about small things, learned each other's habits, figured out how to share space and decisions and a bed. But through it all there was laughter and warmth, and the deep certainty that they were building something that would last. In the spring, Flynn took on his first independent commission, a small footbridge for a neighboring village. He designed it to be beautiful as well as functional, with decorative keystones and carved parapets, and when it was finished, he cut Greta's name into the foundation stone alongside his own. "You are going to put my name on every bridge, are you not?" she said when he showed her. "Every single one. I want people to know that everything I build for you. You are hopelessly romantic. You married me anyway." She laughed and kissed him there beside his new bridge, and Flynn thought that this moment, was worth more than all the prestige and travel and freedom he had given up. That summer Greta discovered she was pregnant, and they were both terrified and overjoyed in equal measure. Flynn began planning additions to the house, a second bedroom and a larger kitchen, working in the evenings after his district rounds. Greta continued at the inn until she began to show, and then the innkeeper's wife insisted she rest and sent her home with pay anyway because, as she said, "That girl has earned every coin and more." The baby was born in late winter, during a snowstorm that trapped the midwife at another birth across the valley. Greta labored for 18 hours with only Flynn and her sister-in-law to help, and when the baby finally came, a healthy boy with green-tinged skin and a powerful set of lungs, Flynn cried as hard as his wife. They named him Finn, and he was perfect despite the tiny tusks that would develop as he grew, despite the pointed ears and the unusual coloring. He was theirs, the living proof that love could bridge any divide. Greta recovered slowly, and Flynn took a month away from his district work to care for her and the baby. He learned to change napkins and soothe colic and function on 3 hours of sleep. He learned that Greta was even stronger than he had known, that she could push a whole human being into the world and then be up making breakfast the next day, because the baby needed to eat. He learned that love was not just the grand gestures and the romantic declarations. It was also the midnight feedings and the worried consultations and the way Greta would catch his eye over the baby's head and smile like they shared the best secret in the world. Finn was 6 months old when Flynn received a letter from the capital. The Royal Bridge Commission wanted to know if he would be interested in designing a bridge for a major river crossing near the palace. It was prestigious work, the kind of project that could define a mason's career, and the pay was extraordinary. Flynn read the letter twice, then showed it to Greta. "This is amazing," she said, bouncing Finn on her hip. "You should do it. It would mean months in the capital, maybe longer. So we would come with you. You hate cities. You told me that," Greta smiled. "I hate the idea of cities. I have never actually been to one. Maybe it would be an adventure. Or maybe it would be miserable, cramped housing, dirty air, people who would stare at you and Finn." Flynn took the letter back and set it aside. "I have everything I want here. I do not need prestigious commissions. But you want this. I can see it in your eyes. I want you and Finn more." Greta studied him for a long moment, then handed him the baby and picked up a pen. She wrote a careful response on the back of the letter, then showed it to Flynn. "Thank you for the opportunity. I am honored by your interest. However, I have commitments in the Upper Valley that prevent me from taking on projects requiring extended time away from the region. I would be happy to consult on the design remotely if that would be useful. Respectfully, Flynn Ortega, District Bridge Warden." "There," she said. "You can contribute without having to leave. Best of both worlds." Flynn pulled her close, careful not to squash Finn between them. "Have I told you lately that I love you? Not in the last hour. I was starting to worry." He laughed and kissed her, and Finn made a happy gurgling sound and grabbed Flynn's hair with a surprisingly strong grip. The commission accepted Flynn's offer to consult, and over the next year he sent detailed drawings and calculations to the capital, while the actual construction was overseen by a local mason. It was satisfying work, and the pay was generous, and Flynn never once regretted turning down the chance to do it in person. Finn grew into a bright, curious toddler who loved nothing more than to watch his father work. Flynn built him a set of small wooden blocks and taught him how to stack them into towers and bridges, and Greta would find them in the workshop for hours. Flynn explaining principles of architecture to a 2-year-old who understood none of it, but loved it anyway. When Finn was 3, Greta discovered she was pregnant again. This time the pregnancy was easier and the birth was faster, and the baby was a girl they named Thea. She had her mother's green skin and her father's brown eyes, and Finn was instantly obsessed with his new sister, demanding to hold her and help with her care. Flynn expanded the house again, adding a second floor with 3 bedrooms so the children would have their own space as they grew. He hired orc workers from Draken's crew to help with the heavy timber work, and they built quickly and well, teasing Flynn good-naturedly about his growing family. "At this rate, you will need a manor house by the time you are 40, Draken said, helping to lift a beam into place. "Just 2 children, hardly a horde," says the man who looks at his wife like she hung the moon. "Give it time." Flynn laughed, but privately he hoped Draken was right. He had never imagined himself as a family man, had never pictured this kind of domestic life. But now that he had it, he could not imagine anything better. The years flowed past like the river under his bridges. Flynn designed and built and consulted, his reputation growing throughout the kingdom as a master of elegant, enduring structures. Greta returned to work at the inn part-time, bringing the children with her during slow hours and teaching them to be helpful and polite to customers. Finn and Thea grew up knowing they were different, knowing that some people stared or whispered, but also knowing they were loved fiercely by both their parents and the community that had embraced their unusual family. Flynn made sure they understood their orc heritage, made sure they spent time with their Uncle Draken and the quarry workers, made sure they were proud of who they were. When Finn was 8 and Thea was 5, Flynn was offered the position of regional bridge master, overseeing bridge construction and maintenance for 3 districts instead of 1. It was a significant promotion with better pay and more responsibility, and it would allow him to take on larger projects while still living in Greywater. He accepted without hesitation, and Greta threw a party at the inn to celebrate, inviting half the valley and roasting a whole pig. Flynn gave a speech about community and family, and the bridges we build between people as well as places. And when he finished, everyone cheered, and Greta kissed him in front of everyone, and Flynn thought his heart might burst from happiness. That autumn, Flynn began work on his most ambitious project yet. A 3-arch stone bridge across the widest point of the river, replacing an aging wooden structure that had been patched and repaired for 50 years. It was a massive undertaking that would take 3 years to complete, and Flynn designed it to be not just functional but beautiful, with carved medallions on the piers and decorative ironwork on the railings. He hired a mixed crew of humans and orcs, paying them equally and fairly, and he made sure his children understood the significance of what they were building. Finn was old enough to help with simple tasks, fetching tools and learning to mix mortar, and Flynn taught him the same way his own master had taught him, with patience and high standards and genuine respect for the work. The bridge rose slowly, stone by stone, year by year. The first arch was completed when Finn was 10, the second when Thea was 8, and finally, in the spring when Finn was 11 and Thea was 9, they set the final keystone in the 3rd arch and the bridge was finished. Flynn stood on the completed structure with his family beside him, looking at the thing he had built, and felt the same satisfaction he had felt with his first bridge, magnified 1,000 times because this time he had a family to share it with. "It is beautiful, Papa," Thea said, holding his hand and looking down at the water below. "Thank you, sweetheart. Do you know what makes it beautiful? The shape," Finn guessed. "The shape helps. But what makes it truly beautiful is that it will be here long after we are gone. Your children might walk across this bridge. Your grandchildren. It is a gift to the future." "I want to build bridges too," Finn announced. "Then I will teach you everything I know." Greta squeezed Flynn's other hand and smiled at him, and Flynn thought about the night she had sat down at his table and changed his life. He thought about the choice he had made to stay, the risk they had both taken on each other, the family they had built together one day at a time. "Are you happy?" Greta asked quietly, the same question she had asked on their wedding night. "More than I ever thought possible. Are you? Every single day." They stood there together on the bridge, the four of them, and watched the sun set over the valley that had become their home. And Flynn thought about all the bridges he had built, all the stones he had laid, all the calculations he had made, and knew that none of it would have meant anything without this, without her, without the life they had created together. The bridge stood for generations, exactly as Flynn had intended, and on the parapet, cut into the stone for anyone to read, were two names side by side, Flynn Ortega and Greta Kane, with the word builders underneath, because that was what they had done together. They had built something that would last,